If you brought a Bible, we'll be in the book of Luke. If you go here often and you didn't bring a Bible, I don't get it. If you don't have a Bible, because you don't come here very often, there may be one in the chair next to you or in your neighbor that you don't know, and that could be a little awkward. Just go ahead and reach for that Bible. We'll be in Luke, chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. It starts out in verse 11 this way. While they were listening to these things, Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they supposed, meaning his followers, that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. There's a ton in this verse, some really heavy statements that really will kind of help launch us into this difficult parable. The first statement is, it says, as they were listening to this. This is Luke's way of letting you and I know the scene has not changed. Meaning, it's both looking back on what just transpired, meaning the passage that we did last week, the story of Zacchaeus. Remember and the blind guy. Jesus is coming into Jericho. He's a day's hike now from entering into Jerusalem for the Passion Week and for his death on the cross. And he heals this guy named Bartimaeus. His name means son of filth, and then who's oppressed. And then he meets this oppressor, this tax farmer, if you will, this tax collector by the name of Zacchaeus, and he loves this oppressor. And it's in the midst of this scene that Jesus then that Luke lets us know that we're in the same scene as that. As they were listening to this, probably heading on out of Jericho. But it's also not just backward looking, it's also forward looking. Jesus is literally within 17 miles, perhaps less, of Jerusalem. A day's walk, a 3,000-foot climb. I think maybe what happened was they leave Jericho and they're just starting that journey, and in the middle of this, Jesus stops for a teaching moment with them. And you can tell by the geography statement, it says he was near Jerusalem. So this passage has a dual focus, and it's really important to see that, because the disciples have no clue what they're walking into. They have no sense of the heaviness that is on Jesus. They have no sense of the requirement on Jesus as the Son of Man, as Messiah of Israel, and on behalf of the world, to suffer and die, even though he has been extremely explicit about what's going to take place. They have no sense of what God will do in his divine purpose for humanity as they enter this thing. It also says, this weird statement, because they supposed the kingdom of God would appear immediately. It's clear in Jesus' day in particular, they were apocalyptic enthusiasts. And with the whole Mayan calendar thing, this should be really, really fresh on our minds. These are the people that pack their bags and wait because they know the hour that it's going to happen. And in a sense, the people in Jesus' day and his followers, they are just that. They're what I would term as apocalyptic enthusiasts. First of all, because Jesus stood with Zacchaeus, and he said to Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to you. And to them, salvation is a different concept than it is to you and I. When we hear the word salvation, we have a very limited view. We view it as, I'm not going to hell anymore, I'm going to heaven, and I'm saved by God. That is, in essence, a very big part of it. But for them, it's much bigger. For them, salvation is that God's rule will come and actually change all of life for eternity. That there will be no more suffering, no more death, no more tears. That Israel will get its rightful king and Messiah back. And so when Jesus says to Zacchaeus, today salvation has come to you, their ears click into something very different than what you and I would be clicking into. On top of that, they are on their way to Jerusalem. They are set within 17 miles of Jerusalem, and they're going there for Passover. Passover is not a celebration. Passover is the celebration, still to this day, for Israel, of its liberation from tyranny. Passover is the celebration for the political celebration that God has taken over control. And so this is what is in the disciples' mind. This whole parable drips with kind of apocalyptic overtones. If salvation came for a loser like Zacchaeus today, then surely salvation for Israel has come for the rest of the nation. And this is what is on the disciples' minds. And it's into this that Jesus speaks, this extremely heavy and difficult parable to kind of get your hands around. Before we look at it, I want to give a couple pieces of very critical background. The first piece is this idea of the kingdom. The New Testament presents some very heavy paradoxes about this word kingdom. And in fact, I remember teaching on this years and years ago. There used to be 2 adult classes upstairs. There was the Journey class that my wife and I tagged onto. They were all the younger people and my wife and I. And then there was another class called Cornerstone. And that was kind of like what they were like the 40 and ups kind of deal. We in the younger group named it Tombstone. And we had Headstone. We had all kinds of really bad names for this because they were younger at the time. Now Journey no longer says that because Journey's made up of a ton of people over 40, so of course we would never do that derogatory. But I remember teaching on this principle of the kingdom, and people were really, really frustrated with this concept. And the reason it's so frustrating is the New Testament actually gives us several paradoxes that make it almost not make sense. What the New Testament says is the kingdom has come, and yet it's still in the future. Well, how is something already here that is yet to come? The Gospels also announce that the kingdom is near and yet far away. That makes no sense whatsoever. And still, Jesus' followers, he tells them, will never know the timing of the kingdom to come, and yet here are all the signs of when it's here. And so no wonder we're confused, and no wonder the disciples were confused. When Jesus came 2,000 years ago, he brought his kingdom. And so you and I, if we have associated ourselves with Jesus as our King and our Messiah, we are a part of that kingdom. That's why the New Testament says things like, we are now citizens of heaven. So Doug McBride is a U.S. citizen, but that's irrelevant compared to my real citizenship. I am a child of the King now, of King Jesus, and that is the kingdom that I dwell in. And so in this world that we now live in, there are now 2 kingdoms. There is the kingdom that Jesus brought 2,000 years ago that I am in right now, and you are too. Jesus is your King and Messiah. It's already here. And so, and we fight against the ruler of this world. And so really, and the idea I've given before is we walk around all day long and we see that. And we know that the chair should not be turned upside down. And so, as fellow heirs of Christ, we walk around and we go like this. It's exactly what you shared, Brian. We walk all day long and we see what's broken and we wait for the Spirit to move us, and then we, with God's help, redeem life. That's part of His kingdom. And so the kingdom in that sense has already come. But there's another sense that the kingdom is yet to come in the sense that it's not complete. If I asked any individual in this room right now, if you saw something dark this week, you would raise your hand so quick, you'd make your head spin. Because Satan still rules this world, it's still dark, and so even though Jesus' kingdom has come, it has not come in completion. And so you and I, again, if we wait for Jesus as our King and Messiah, we wait for Him to return to reestablish complete rule, to throw Satan down forever. And the idea isn't that you and I are going to heaven, by the way. The idea is heaven is coming here. And God will reestablish His rule on earth. Reestablish the whole garden scene and then some. So that's an important concept to get in this. And that's exactly what the disciples are struggling with. I don't get the difference, they say, between His kingdom is here and yet it is not yet here. And so for them, when Jesus says salvation is here right now, they think, wow, this is it. This is the future kingdom come. Does that make sense? Are you with me? If you don't understand this concept, we're not going to understand the parable. This is very important. When Brian teaches next week, Brian's going to teach on the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And Brian will share some things with you that I would gather most of you have probably never heard as Jesus enters in as the triumphal king. what could have happened and what did happen. And so that'll be really important for you to hear that next week. The second thing I want to highlight before we look at this passage of this parable is the history. Without the history behind this parable makes no sense whatsoever. Just a really brief history for about 2-3 minutes here. In 40 BC, Herod the Great, under the rule of Rome, desired to be king of the province of Israel, underneath Roman rule. So he wanted to be the king of Israel underneath Caesar, if you will. And so he literally got in a boat and went to Rome to meet with Caesar to ask for an appointment to be king in Israel. Now, there was another group of delegation that did not want Herod to be king. They wanted someone else to be king, so they actually got in a boat right behind him and followed him to Caesar and made an argument against Herod the Great. Well, that was a bad mistake because Herod the Great won his audience with the Caesar. Caesar appointed him king over all of Israel, and in a way that almost only Herod could do, he completely obliterated and with judgment and he executed this entire delegation that went to fight against his throne. Does that make sense? So he was successful in his appointment. Now, you run the clock forward. He dies around 4 BC. He has several sons. One of his sons in 4 BC, Archelaus, decides, I want the same thing my dad did. So he gets in a boat and he goes to Rome and he meets with Caesar because he now wants to be Herod the Great, his father's heir. He wants to rule all of Israel. Right behind him, another boat of delegation goes right behind him to Caesar, and they say he's an idiot and was kind of an idiot. He shouldn't rule all of Israel. And what Caesar ends up doing is he divides Israel into 3 compartments, and he gives it to all 3 of Herod's sons. Antipas, Archelaus, and Philip. And so each of these quadrants, like Galilee is ruled by one, Jerusalem, the Judah area is ruled by another, the eastern side is ruled by Philip. And so when Archelaus went to get the kingdom, a delegation followed. He actually was unsuccessful. These 2 stories, Herod going and a delegation following him, and yet he was successful, and his son Archelaus going to get the whole kingdom, and he is unsuccessful, and the delegation wins. These 2 pieces of history are on the minds of the disciples when they listen to this parable. So with that background, let's now look at the parable. Verse 12. So he said, a nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then return. So the nobleman in this parable obviously is confident when he goes to this other distant country, he's going to be appointed the king. But not everybody around him shares this same thought. The delegation, if you will, does not agree with him. Verse 13. And he called 10 of his slaves and gave them 10 minas, or the word is pounds in Greek, 10 pounds, and said to them, do business with this until I come back. A pound was the equivalent of 100 days' wages. So literally, almost a half of your year of work. It's a ton of money. And so this nobleman calls these 10 slaves and he gives them each 10 pounds or 100 days' wages to invest while he's gone. And this passage, and including my translation, usually translates it, engage in trade until I get back. This word translated until, it's the word inho, and it actually can be translated in several ways. If it is translated in this way, engage in trade until I come back, it's actually a time reference. And really, what that really would be saying then is, look, here's the deal, I'm going to give you 10 pounds each, I'm going to be gone for a while, but when I come back, you better produce something. Because there's going to be just a period of time until I get back, and when I get back, I expect to see results from the 10 pounds I get you. But the fascinating thing about this parable is, the master commends the servants that did well, not for producing something, not for being successful. What the master commends them for is actually being faithful. And so another way that you would translate this, and a much more accurate way to translate this verse, would be engage in trade because I'm coming back. Engage in trade because I'm coming back. What Jesus is saying is this in this parable. This nobleman looks at these guys and he says to his servants, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you $50,000 each. I'm going to go to this other country. I'm going to try to get the appointment to be king. I'm confident I'm going to win. I know I'm going to be successful. And so I want you to take this 50,000, I want you to open up a wine shop and call it His New Majesty's Wine Shop. Put my name on it, if you will. Doug's New Majesty Wine Shop. So they know who you're behind and who gave you the money. And then, don't worry, there's going to be people that are going to fight me on this. They're going to not want me to be made ruler, but I'm telling you I'm going to win. So when I come back, I can't wait to see that you have my shop with my name on it. Not knowing for sure if I'm going to come back, but I guarantee you I will. This is behind the statement that Jesus is giving me. So the question then is, what will the servants do? Verse 14. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him. Does that sound familiar? Saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. The word man does not exist in the Greek, by the way. Really, this is, we don't want this blankety blank to rule over this. It's a blank in the text, if you will. It's an expletive. These guys really hate him. Again, the story assumes that the servants know there's a delegation that's going to go after the nobleman to fight for him to not be successful. And that their intention is to undermine this nobleman's ability to receive the appointment as king. And anybody that grasps the instability in the Middle East knows that during the time of Jesus, the best thing to do if you are given this 10 pounds is to just lay low. Right? Because if that proposed nobleman goes off, and he's not successful, and in the interim you've opened up a shop with his name on it, it's like committing suicide. So the intelligent thing to do is to not bet on either horse, right? To just lay low, see if the delegation wins, or if the nobleman wins, and then open up shop with whosever name is on it, and then in that you're safe. And so that's exactly what we find in this passage. Remember, when Herod the Great went, he was successful. The delegation was executed. But his son Archelaus was unsuccessful. So the question in the mind of the listener is, I've seen this work, and I've seen this parable not work. Which one am I looking at? The nobleman wants to know, will the servant take a risk on me before they're guaranteed that I've returned with success? Does that make sense? Meaning, declare yourself, the nobleman says, as a loyal subject of mine before I am given the kingdom. Assume I'm coming back, is the statement. Because once I return, if you declare your loyalty to me, it means nothing. Anybody can do that. But do it before you know for certain I'm coming back. That takes a little chutzpah. That takes some serious trust. Verse 15. When he returned, after receiving the kingdom, so he's successful, he ordered that these slaves to whom he had given the pounds be called to him so that he might know what business they had done. So in spite of the opposition, the nobleman in the story gets his kingly position. And in returns, he immediately calls in his 10 servants. And one by one, they give a report. And the Greek translation literally is, and I love what the New American Standard has done with this, it is, I want to know what business you have done. First of all, this word business, this is the only time this word is used in the entire New Testament. And what's key is, the nobleman does not ask the servant, I want to know how much business you've done. He doesn't ask that. He asks rather, I want to know what business you have done. And these words are super critical, the difference. The master is not asking the servants how much they produced or gained with the investment he gave them. He's rather trying to figure out, were you willing to openly and publicly declare your loyalty to me before you knew for certain that I would come back with the appointment as king? Are you willing to associate yourself to me in this risky period of time when it's not 100% guaranteed I will come back. It's these two translations together that really wring this passage out. In verse 13, engage in trade because I'm coming back. The emphasis again is faithfulness, not success. And then verse 15, what business has been transacted? The emphasis again is faithfulness, not success. So this isn't a passage or a verse about producing. It's not a pressure-packed thing of what have you done, what I've given you, and did you make something out of it? That's not it at all. Look at verse 16. The first appeared, saying, Master, your pound has made 10 pounds more. And he said to him, Well done, good slave, because you have been faithful in a very little thing. You are to be an authority over 10 cities. The second came and said, Your pound, master, has made 5 pounds. And he said to him, And you are to be over 5 cities. Notice the faithful servants are the first to report. This makes sense, because if you didn't bet on him, you're the last guy that wants to talk to this nobleman, which I think is kind of funny. And notice what they could have said. This is Doug fun, and I'm sorry about this, but I like reading my Bible and reading into it what it doesn't say, because it helps me realize then what it's actually saying. Notice they don't say to him, Master, I burned the candle at both ends. They don't say, Master, I did all the right things. They don't say, Master, listen to this, I was successful in what I produced. What do they say instead? It's an extremely important statement. What do they say? Say it again. The concise truth. And what is it? What is it? The literal words. What do they say? Say it again. What an odd comment. Your gift produced more gifts. Your pound. Isn't that a fascinating comment? Isn't that a non-successful kind of comment? Your pound produced the fruit, not what we did. I think that's, again, amazing. He commends them not for being successful. He commends them for being faithful. Literally, for simply being willing to associate themselves with him before they had a guarantee that he would come back with his rightful kingship. And the reward, by the way, is more mutual trust. And it doesn't feel like pressure on these servants that were faithful and had all this stuff work for two obvious reasons. First of all, they have faith the master's going to return successful. Right? They know he will be appointed king because I'm coming back. They're confident of that. But also, there's no pressure on them because it's the master's gifts that are producing the results, not the servants. 1 Corinthians 3, Paul says this, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. So that neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God who causes the growth. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, but each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. And I noted that, meaning not according to his own success, not according to what he produces. The verse says, each will receive a reward according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field and God's building. Look at verse 20. Another came saying, Master, here is your pound which I kept put away in a handkerchief. For I was afraid of you because you are an exacting man. You take up what you did not lay down, you reap what you did not sow. And he said to him, By your words I will judge you, you worthless slave. Did you know that I am an exacting man, taking up what I did not lay down and reaping what I did not sow? Then why did you not put my money in the bank, and having come, I would have at least collected it with interest? The third guy comes, and he's afraid. He claims to be afraid. But he's also more than likely knows if he publicly pronounces his loyalty to this master and he doesn't come back successful, he's in a huge pickle. But the problem was, he didn't bet on the right horse. The nobleman gets the appointment, wins his kingship, and this guy is on the outside. And what's fascinating too, and this is kind of a weird twist, but it looks like he's unsuccessful. The slave screws up, he bets on the wrong horse, and then he insults him on top of it. I don't think he's actually insulting this nobleman. I think he's actually trying to compliment him, which may sound like a weird statement. Because you think, how on earth is this a compliment, telling somebody you reap what you don't sow and you're an exacting man? Well, if you've been to the Middle East, you know that in a lot of areas in the Middle East, this is a deep compliment. You know, it's one thing to labor and get paid for it. But the really smart guy is the one that doesn't have to work that hard and makes a ton of money. And in a lot of Bedouin cultures, the Bedouin leaders, I've actually read stories of songs that have been written to certain Bedouin leaders about how they're able to plunder and have all this wealth without having to do any work. I read this weird thing in the Babylonian Talmud. Listen to this. This is an interpretation of David. Brian, you're going to love this one. It says, a harp was hanging above David's head, above his bed. As soon as midnight arrived, a north wind came and blew upon it, and it played itself. He arose immediately and studied the Torah until the break of dawn. After the break of dawn, the wise men of Israel came to see him, and he said to him, Our Lord, King David, Israel, your people, require sustenance. He said to them, Let them go out and make a living, one from another. And they said to David, A handful cannot satisfy a lion, nor can a pit be filled up with its own clods. David said to them, Then go out in troops and attack the enemy for plunder. King David, in this translation of the Babylonian Talmud, is portrayed as a guy who stays up all night studying Torah, and when he comes up in the morning is, go raid all the other nations around you and steal all their stuff so we don't have to work. Reaping where you did not sow. It's not accurate, of course, but it's a depiction that in the time of Jesus they believed. And so this slave who was afraid of him, who didn't want to bet on the horse that he wasn't sure was going to win, was trying to compliment him. But unfortunately, in an area that Jesus is from, in an agricultural setting, this is a horrible thing to say to a farming person or a person from fishing villages. He has grossly miscalculated the master in this thing. So what is the master's response? In essence, he leaves him with his own twisted understanding of what the nobleman he thinks is like. Psalm 18 says this, With the kind you show yourself kind, with the blameless you show yourself blameless, with the pure you show yourself pure, and with the crooked you show yourself astute. Look at verse 24. Then he said to the bystanders, Take the pound away from him, and give it to the one who has the 10 pounds. And they said to him, Master, he has 10 pounds already, meaning that doesn't seem fair. And I tell you that to everyone who has, more shall be given, but from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. But these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them in my presence. Suddenly the delegation of opponents appear in the parable again. And it's a really hard text to read. It rings poorly in our ears. It's more than likely, as we've seen the last couple of months, and we will really see in the next 3 months, in the last week of Jesus' life that we studied, that it's probably speaking to the Jewish leadership, the Sanhedrin, the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes that have brought this nation to its knees in a poor way, and who have failed to receive their rightful king in Jesus. It is probably who Jesus speaks of. See, Jesus is the nobleman in this parable, and it's the delegation of the Jewish leadership that has gone after him to be his opponent, to keep him from reigning. It's interesting, though, that there's no mention of whether this slaying in my presence is ever carried out. The parable stops. You see very quickly what they deserve, but there's no mention that it actually takes place. You can see the master's generosity throughout this parable. First of all, he gives the servants the gifts they didn't deserve or earn in any way, in pounds. And then the same generosity is manifested by giving them even more things when it was His gift that produced it in the first place. And on top of that, He's, in my opinion, even generous with His unfaithful slave. He doesn't fine him. He doesn't punish him. He just doesn't even dismiss him. He's still standing there. And now publicly, He announces what His enemies deserve, but there's no mention of what actually takes place in the parable. I think there's a huge thing that we need to hear. And Brian, it's fascinating you started this morning with, because it was what I was thinking about this morning, this whole idea of the New Year's resolution. I've never done one. I'm not against them. I think they're great. My problem is I'm kind of so messed up. I have to make them about every 2 or 3 days. And so there's no point in picking one day of the year because I have so many things I can change about myself. That would really be amiss to everybody around me to only pick one day a year. My wife needs me to do this way more than once a year. My kids need this way more. My friends need this way more. But there is maybe something for us as a body that is a resolution. And this is Doug opinion stuff now. So just hear it as it is. It's interesting, we've been doing this weird church thing together now for 2 years in the way we've been doing it. We call it the priesthood of believers, that we've all been given pounds, right? That God has come to each of us. Jesus has, and He said, here's the deal. Pledge your loyalty to me. You'll be a part of my kingdom. I'm going to go away for a while, but I'm going to give you gifts. And here's the deal. I'm coming back. So anybody in this room, and it's most of you, by the way, because I know many of you, that has declared your loyalty to Jesus before He's returned, this is who He's talking about. These are the faithful servants. And what we need to remember is, it is the nobleman, it is the king that has given us the gifts. And it's the gifts that produce the results. So the call for you and I is not to be a successful church and successful individuals. What God has asked you and I to be is faithful. Does that make sense? Faithful to realize that He's the one that poured His Spirit into me. He's the one that walks around with me all day long and taps me on the shoulder and says, Doug, do you notice that? Do you notice the chairs falling over? Let's you and I together do this. Let's slow our schedule down to love somebody. Let's listen to what your calling is. This is what God wants me to do in that calling. See, this is a pound that God has given me. And all He said to me to do is just study and stand. But it's not the teaching. It's not Doug that's doing anything. See, I can't teach you anything. It's the Spirit of God. It's the gift that He's given that actually produces the success. So there's no pressure on me whatsoever. And there's no pressure on you. The danger that I think we have then is we do things like we go, well, we don't look like the other church. They do so many things. And the answer really is, that's irrelevant. Because we're not measured on success. We're measured on faithfulness. Does that make sense? Yes. Anytime we look around at another individual and say, Guy, he just produces so much. What's wrong with me? We're completely off base. See, because first of all, I'm not asked to produce anything. I'm asked to declare my loyalty to the King, trusting He will come back. And I believe He's going to come back, or I'll never waste my morning with you, quite frankly. And knowing that His gifts, the gift of His Spirit, the gift of His talents, the gifts of His kindness that He reminds us of, pours through us, they will produce the results. As a church, let's not let each other get off track. This is church. And believe me, there are mornings when I ask myself, wow, gosh, that happened to me last week. I look around, I go, wow, there's just not very many people here. Maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Maybe they're not doing the right thing. It's the wrong question. And I'm very susceptible to it. That's why I'm sharing this with you. Our calling as believers is not success. That's God's problem. We associate ourselves in loyalty to Jesus. We remain hopeful, not wistfully, that He will return and bring heaven to earth. And we rely on His gifts to produce results. Johnny, you guys come on. Let me read this quote. The British journalist once asked Mother Teresa how she kept going, knowing. Let's do this. This is a question that we all think about things, but we never want to say because it's so bad. How does she keep going, knowing that she could never meet the needs of all the dying in the streets of Calcutta? Listen to this little old lady's response. She says, I'm not called to be successful. I'm called to be faithful. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Father, so many times I look for results and I apologize. Father, you give the gift, you produce. We simply dig, we water, we weed, and we watch. Father, this next year, would you guard our church? Would you guard our thinking? And we tell you we appreciate the fact that you have an appreciation, actually, that we've been willing to declare ourselves as loyal subjects to you when the world tells us you're not that good. May we find great, great joy, Father, in knowing that you are exceedingly pleased with us. Give us the eyes to watch your pounds produce more pounds, as we with light and narrow shoulders watch you with broad and strong shoulders redeem this world.